Every small town has its ghost story, but Millfields was different. 8 teenagers who walked into their graduation party and never walked out. Their disappearance launched the largest missing persons investigation in county history. Private detectives, psychics, even FBI agents tried to solve it. None of them thought to look behind the gymnasium wall, where the 8 had been waiting all along. The story began on June 15, 1994, at Jefferson High School's graduation party. The gymnasium was decorated with blue and gold streamers, balloons floating against the ceiling like captured dreams. A local DJ played hits from the radio while students danced under flickering disco lights that cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor. 8 friends had arrived together that night, their bond forged through 4 years of shared classes, football games, and weekend adventures. They were the kind of group that made teachers smile, parents proud, and other students wish they belonged to something so solid and unbreakable. Michael Rodriguez was the natural leader, standing tall at 17 with dark eyes that sparkled when he laughed. As class president, he had delivered the graduation speech that afternoon, talking about dreams and futures with the confidence of someone who believed the world was waiting for him. His parents had immigrated from Mexico when he was 3, working double shifts at the textile factories so Michael could be the first in his family to attend college. He carried their hopes along with his own, and it showed in everything he did. His acceptance letter to State University's engineering program was already framed on his bedroom wall, next to a photo of the bridge he planned to design someday. Sarachan stood beside him, adjusting her graduation cap with the same precision she brought to everything else. She was quiet but fierce, the kind of student who spent lunch periods in the biology lab and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Her parents ran the only Chinese restaurant in Millfield, and Sarah had grown up translating for customers and helping with homework in the back booth. She spoke 3 languages fluently and had already been accepted to pre-veterinary programs at 2 different universities. Her notebook was filled with sketches of the animal clinic she wanted to open in town someday, complete with bilingual signs and a special fund for families who couldn't afford treatment. David Thompson nervously adjusted his tie for the 3rd time that evening. He was tall and lanky, with sandy hair that never quite stayed in place and a quiet intensity that made him seem older than his 18 years. David had been accepted to 3 different colleges but still couldn't decide which to attend. His parents had divorced when he was 14, and he'd spent the last 4 years shuttling between 2 houses, 2 sets of expectations, and 2 completely different visions of his future. His mother wanted him to study business and take over his grandfather's insurance agency. His father pushed for engineering like Michael. David just wanted to write, though he'd never told anyone about the short stories he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Amanda Foster held David's hand tightly, her other arm linked through Sarah's in the way that had become natural after 4 years of friendship. She was artistic and dreamy, with long blonde hair that she wore in elaborate braids and a smile that could light up any room. Amanda came from what people politely called a complicated family. Her mother had struggled with addiction for years, disappearing for weeks at a time before returning with promises and apologies. Amanda had learned early to take care of herself, and her art became her escape. She painted landscapes mostly, dreaming of traveling to places far from Millfield's struggles and disappointments. Her portfolio was strong enough for art school, but the money had always been a question mark. The Miller twins, Jake and Josh, were identical in appearance but opposite in every other way. Jake was the athlete, broad-shouldered and confident, with an easy laugh and a scholarship to play baseball at the community college. He was the kind of person who made friends effortlessly and never met a challenge he didn't think he could conquer. Josh was quieter, more thoughtful, with the same face but different eyes. He loved computers and mathematics, spending hours teaching himself programming languages that wouldn't become common for another decade. While Jake planned to major in sports management, Josh had been accepted to study computer science at a time when few people understood what that even meant. Lisa Park was the academic star of the group, valedictorian with a perfect GPA and acceptance letters to 5 different universities. She was Korean American, adopted as a baby by the Parks, who ran the local pharmacy. Lisa had always felt the weight of being exceptional, of representing not just herself but her family's investment in her success. She planned to study medicine, following in the footsteps of the Korean doctor who had inspired her during a school career day. Her speech that afternoon had quoted Maya Angelou and challenged her classmates to think beyond Millfield's borders. Tony Carlucci completed the group with his infectious humor and loyal heart. He was Italian-American, short and stocky, with curly dark hair and an expression that suggested he was always about to tell a joke. Tony was the class clown, but not in a disruptive way. He had a gift for making people laugh when they needed it most, for finding light in dark moments. His parents owned a small construction company, and Tony planned to join them after graduation, though he secretly harbored dreams of becoming a comedian. His notebook was filled with observations about small-town life that would have made excellent stand-up material. These 8 had been inseparable since freshman year, when a random seating arrangement in Mrs. Henderson's English class had put them together for a group project. What started as academic necessity had grown into something deeper. They studied together, celebrated together, and supported each other through the normal dramas of teenage life. Their families had become intertwined, sharing holidays and milestones and the quiet moments that make up a life. On that June evening, they moved through the graduation party as a unit, dancing and laughing and taking pictures with the disposable cameras that everyone carried. They talked about college and summer plans and the ways their lives would change. But beneath the celebration was an undercurrent of sadness, the knowledge that this chapter was ending and the next might scatter them across different states and different futures. It was Sarah who first suggested they explore the school one more time. "We should see it all before we leave," she said, her voice barely audible over the music. "We might never be back here together again." The others agreed immediately. They had spent 4 years in these hallways, and the building held 1,000 memories. Their first day as nervous freshmen. The homecoming dance where David and Amanda had their first kiss. The chemistry lab where Josh had accidentally created a small explosion. The art room where Amanda had painted her first real masterpiece. Security cameras later showed them leaving the gymnasium at 11:47 p.m., walking together down the main corridor toward the administrative wing. They appeared relaxed and happy, talking animatedly as they disappeared around a corner. Michael's arm was around Sarah's shoulders. Amanda and David were holding hands. The twins were engaged in what looked like a friendly argument. Lisa was gesturing as she told a story, and Tony was clearly building up to a punchline. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. When their absence was noticed around 1 a.m., the initial assumption was that they had simply left early or gone to another party. These were good kids, honor students, athletes, not the type to cause trouble or worry their parents. But as the hours passed and none of them returned home, concern began to spread. By morning, when their cars were found still parked in the school lot, panic set in. The investigation that followed was unprecedented for Millfield, a town where the most serious crime in recent memory had been the theft of lawn mowers from the hardware store. Local police were joined by county sheriffs, state investigators, and eventually federal agents. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived within 48 hours, setting up a command center in the school cafeteria. Detective Patricia Hoffman, who led the local investigation, had been on the force for 15 years but had never handled anything like this. She was a careful, methodical woman who believed that every case could be solved with enough attention to detail. She interviewed every student who had attended the graduation party, every teacher who had access to the building, every janitor who had worked that night. The interviews revealed a consistent timeline. Multiple witnesses remembered seeing the 8 friends together throughout the evening. They had danced, eaten cake, and participated in the usual graduation party activities. Several classmates mentioned that the group had talked about exploring the school, but no one thought much of it at the time. Sarah's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Chen, were the first to realize something was wrong. Sarah was responsible, the kind of daughter who always called if she was going to be late. When she hadn't returned home by 2 a.m., her mother had called Amanda's house, then David's, then all the others. The growing network of worried phone calls had awakened 8 families to their worst nightmare. The search began at dawn. Volunteers came from across the county, organizing into teams that combed every inch of the school grounds. They searched the building room by room, checking every classroom, every storage closet, every possible hiding place. They examined the surrounding woods, the nearby creek, the abandoned buildings on the edge of town. The school itself was thoroughly investigated. The 8 friends had been captured on security cameras entering the administrative wing, but the cameras in that section had malfunctioned months earlier and were never repaired. Budget constraints had prevented their replacement, leaving a blind spot in the very area where the students had last been seen. Michael's parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, had barely spoken English when they arrived in Millfield 18 years earlier. They had learned the language, built a life, and raised a son who embodied their dreams of American success. Maria worked as a seamstress, her fingers moving quickly over fabric while she worried. Carlos managed the night shift at a warehouse, and he hadn't slept since the disappearance. They spoke to reporters in careful, accented English, pleading for information about their son. David's divorced parents, for once, united in their anguish. His mother, Patricia Thompson, was a real estate agent who prided herself on being organized and in control. The uncertainty was destroying her. She created spreadsheets of search activities, coordinated volunteer schedules, and called the police multiple times each day for updates. David's father, Robert, was a truck driver who took unpaid leave to join every search party. He walked miles of creek beds and forest trails, calling his son's name until his voice gave out. Amanda's mother, Linda Foster, was battling her own demons while trying to cope with her daughter's disappearance. She had been sober for 8 months, her longest stretch in years, but the stress threatened to break her resolve. Amanda's grandmother moved in to provide support and keep Linda from falling back into old patterns. They sat together at the kitchen table each morning, drinking coffee and staring at Amanda's latest painting propped against the window. The Park family threw themselves into organizing search efforts. Dr. Park used his connections in the medical community to bring in specialists who might help with the investigation. Mrs. Park, normally reserved in private, appeared on television programs and spoke at press conferences, her composed exterior masking a mother's devastation. Their pharmacy became an unofficial headquarters for volunteers, with maps and flyers covering every surface. The Miller family struggled with losing both their sons at once. Jake had been their athlete, the one who filled the house with trophies and the noise of friends. Josh had been their quiet genius, the son who fixed their computer problems and explained technology they didn't understand. Losing one would have been devastating, losing both felt impossible to survive. Mr. Miller, a mechanic, threw himself into helping with the search vehicles, checking and maintaining cars for the volunteers who spent their days looking for his sons. Tony's large Italian family turned their grief outward, feeding the volunteers and investigators who worked around the clock. The Carlucci kitchen became a gathering place where people could find comfort food and warm conversation. Mrs. Carlucci cooked for dozens each day, insisting that everyone needed to keep up their strength. Mr. Carlucci, typically jovial, grew quiet and serious, but he was always ready to organize another search party or print more flyers. The families hired private investigators when the official search seemed to stall. Patricia Chen, Sarah's mother, liquidated her savings account to pay for a former FBI agent who specialized in missing persons cases. The Rodriguez family held fundraisers at their church, with the entire Latino community contributing what they could. David's parents finally agreed on something, pooling their resources to hire a team that used dogs and specialized equipment. Psychics began arriving in town, claiming they could sense the missing teenagers. Most were well-meaning but unhelpful, offering vague impressions about water or darkness or confusion. A few seemed to be taking advantage of desperate families, charging fees for readings that provided no useful information. Detective Hoffman tried to screen these individuals, but she couldn't prevent families from seeking any possible source of hope. The media attention was intense initially. Local news stations provided daily updates, and national programs featured the case during slow news periods. The story had everything reporters looked for: photogenic victims, a mysterious disappearance, and a community rallying together. But as weeks passed without new developments, coverage began to fade. The missing students became old news, replaced by more recent tragedies and sensations. Conspiracy theories began to flourish in the absence of facts. Some people believed the teenagers had run away together, planning to start new lives somewhere else. Others suspected they had been kidnapped by strangers passing through town. A few whispered about more sinister possibilities involving people they knew, trusted members of the community who might be hiding dark secrets. The investigation revealed several troubling facts. The school's security system was inadequate, with blind spots and malfunctioning cameras that should have been repaired months earlier. The building itself had numerous unlocked doors and windows, making it easy for someone to enter undetected. There were also questions about staffing that night. 2 janitors who were scheduled to work had called in sick, leaving the building less supervised than usual. Detective Hoffman interviewed everyone with access to the school. Teachers, administrators, maintenance staff, and security guards all submitted to questioning. Most were cooperative, but a few seemed nervous or evasive. One janitor, hired just months before the disappearance, quit his job the following week and moved out of state. Attempts to locate him for follow-up questioning were unsuccessful. The investigation also revealed that the school had a history of issues. There had been reports of break-ins and vandalism over the past year. Items had gone missing from classrooms and offices. Some students had reported seeing strangers on the property after hours, though these sightings were never confirmed. As months passed, the case began to affect the entire community. Parents became overprotective of their children, instituting new rules about curfews and supervision. The school board implemented additional security measures, including new cameras and improved lighting. But these changes felt like closing the barn door after the horses had escaped. The surviving members of the graduation class struggled with survivors' guilt and trauma. Many sought counseling, trying to process the loss of their friends and the knowledge that it could have been them. Some developed anxiety disorders or depression. Others threw themselves into college or work, trying to escape the shadow of what had happened in their hometown. Teachers and school staff also suffered. They questioned whether they had missed warning signs or failed to protect the students in their care. Several teachers transferred to other schools, unable to continue working in the building where their students had disappeared. The principal took early retirement, and the assistant principal requested a transfer to the district office. The case officially went cold after 2 years, though Detective Hoffman never stopped working on it entirely. She kept the files in her office, reviewing them whenever she had spare time. She followed up on every tip that came in, no matter how unlikely. She attended conferences on missing persons cases and studied similar disappearances in other states. The families never gave up hope entirely, but they were forced to find ways to live with uncertainty. Some created memorial scholarships in their children's names. Others became advocates for missing persons' families or worked to improve school security. A few moved away from Millfield, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. By the 10-year anniversary, the case was rarely mentioned except during memorial services. The families held a vigil each June, gathering in the school parking lot to remember their children and renew their commitment to finding answers. But fewer people attended each year, and the media coverage dwindled to brief mentions in local papers. The 15-year mark passed quietly. Some of the parents had aged dramatically, their hair gray and faces lined with worry. Others had found ways to channel their grief into positive action, but the pain never fully disappeared. The missing students would have been in their 30s by then, possibly married with children of their own. The families wondered what their lives might have looked like. By 20 years, half the community had no memory of the disappearance. New residents had moved to town, and younger people knew the story only as local legend. The families began to accept that they might never learn the truth, though they never stopped hoping for answers. The 25th anniversary brought renewed media attention, with documentary filmmakers and podcast creators revisiting the case. New theories emerged based on advances in criminal profiling and cold case techniques. But despite the fresh perspectives and modern technology, no breakthrough came. As the 30th anniversary approached, most people had accepted that the case would never be solved. The parents were now elderly, some in poor health. The community had healed as much as it could while still carrying the scar of the unsolved mystery. That's when the renovation project began. The school board had finally approved funding to modernize Jefferson High's aging infrastructure after decades of makeshift repairs and budget constraints. The original building was now over 50 years old, with outdated electrical systems, inadequate heating and cooling, and classroom spaces that no longer met modern educational standards. The renovation plan was ambitious, involving a complete overhaul of the building's interior while preserving its historic exterior. New classrooms would be created, technology infrastructure would be installed, and the entire facility would be brought up to current safety and accessibility standards. Robert Hayes, the contractor selected for the job, had grown up in Millfield and graduated from Jefferson High in the early 1980s. He remembered the missing student's case, though it had happened after his time. His own children had attended the school, and he was proud to be part of modernizing the facility for future generations. Work began in March with the installation of new electrical panels in the basement. The crew then moved to the main floor, systematically removing outdated fixtures and preparing walls for new wiring. Everything proceeded according to schedule for the first several weeks. The project reached the gymnasium area in late May. According to the architectural plans, the gymnasium would be expanded by incorporating an adjacent storage room that was no longer needed. The renovation would create additional space for equipment and activities while improving the overall flow of the facility. Hayes expected the demolition to be routine. The wall between the gymnasium and storage room appeared to be standard construction from the building's original era. But when he raised his sledgehammer for the first strike, something stopped him. The sound wasn't right. Instead of the solid thud of hammer against masonry, there was a hollow echo that suggested empty space beyond the wall. Hayes had been in construction for 20 years, and he knew the difference between solid and hollow construction. This wall was definitely not solid. He set down his sledgehammer and examined the wall more carefully, running his hands along the painted surface. What he discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the missing student's case. The wall wasn't what it appeared to be. Careful inspection revealed hairline cracks that outlined a rectangular section approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. The paint in this area was subtly different, as if someone had tried to match an existing color but hadn't quite succeeded. Most telling were the faint tool marks around the edges, evidence that this section had been carefully removed and replaced. Hayes immediately called his supervisor, who called the school principal, who called the police. Within 2 hours, the construction site had been transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape surrounded the gymnasium, and investigators arrived to examine what Hayes had discovered. Detective Maria Santos, who had taken over the missing student's case when Detective Hoffman retired, was on scene within an hour. She was younger than Hoffman but equally thorough, and she had reviewed the cold case files many times since joining the department. The discovery of the false wall was the first significant development in the case in over 20 years. Using ground-penetrating radar, investigators confirmed that there was indeed a space behind the false wall. The hidden chamber measured approximately 8 feet deep, 10 feet wide, and 7 feet high. It appeared to be completely sealed with no visible entrance or ventilation system. The decision was made to carefully remove the false wall rather than break through it destructively. The process took several hours as investigators documented every step with photographs and precise measurements. They wanted to preserve any evidence that might explain how and when this hidden space had been created. When the last piece of drywall was carefully lifted away, powerful LED lights illuminated a space that had been sealed in darkness for 3 decades. The air that escaped was stale and heavy, carrying scents of dust, time, and something else that made the seasoned investigators step back in shock. Inside the hidden chamber was the answer to Millfield's greatest mystery. 8 graduation caps hung from hooks along one wall, their blue fabric faded but still recognizable. Below them, formal were hung from a makeshift clothing rod, dresses, suits, and accessories that families would later confirm belonged to their missing children. The corsages and boutonnieres were still pinned in place, dried and brittle but preserved by the sealed environment. Personal belongings were arranged on crude wooden shelves: purses, wallets, car keys, and jewelry that hadn't been seen for 30 years. There were also items that hadn't been reported missing initially, things the teenagers had apparently brought with them during their final exploration of the school building. But the most shocking discovery was in the center of the hidden room. 8 school desks had been arranged in a tight circle, the same type used throughout Jefferson High. On each desk sat an open notebook filled with handwritten pages. The notebooks contained journal entries, letters, and personal reflections written in the distinctive handwriting of each missing student. The journal entries began on June 16, 1994, the day after the graduation party, and continued for several weeks. They told a story that no investigator, family member, or community resident could have imagined. Michael Rodriguez's notebook revealed that the 8 friends had discovered the hidden chamber during their late-night exploration of the school. What they thought was a storage closet or maintenance area had turned out to be something much more sinister. The space had apparently been created years earlier and forgotten, or perhaps deliberately concealed. Sarah Chen's careful handwriting documented their growing realization that they were trapped. The chamber had no windows, no ventilation, and no way to communicate with the outside world. They had apparently entered through a concealed entrance that had locked or sealed behind them, making escape impossible. David Thompson's entries showed his attempts to remain calm and rational while developing plans for escape. He had tried to map the space, looking for weaknesses in the walls or ceiling. His engineering mindset led him to calculate air volume and estimate how long they might survive in the sealed space. Amanda Foster's journal contained heartbreaking letters to her family, expressing love and forgiveness for her mother's struggles. She wrote about the paintings she would never create and the places she would never see. Her artistic eye captured details about their prison that others missed. The Miller twins' notebooks revealed how they had tried to maintain hope and support their friends. Jake wrote about organizing activities to keep everyone's spirits up, while Josh focused on problem-solving and technical analysis of their situation. Even facing death, they had maintained their distinct personalities. Lisa Park's entries were methodical and detailed, documenting their daily activities and the gradual deterioration of their physical and mental condition. She recorded symptoms of oxygen deprivation and dehydration, approaching their situation with scientific observation even as hope faded. Tony Carlucci's journal showed how he had tried to keep everyone laughing and positive, even in their desperate circumstances. His entries were filled with jokes, stories, and observations about their friendship. But as time passed, even his irrepressible optimism began to fade. The final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, revealed that the 8 friends had faced their fate with courage and dignity. They had supported each other until the end, sharing their fears and hopes and final thoughts in written form since they couldn't share them with the families they would never see again. The discovery sent shockwaves through Millfield and captured national attention. The story of the 8 missing students had always been tragic, but learning that they had survived for weeks while the community searched desperately for them added a new dimension of heartbreak. The subsequent investigation revealed disturbing facts about the school's construction and renovation history. The hidden chamber had apparently been created during a repair project in the late 1980s, several years before the students disappeared. Records showed that work had been planned for the gymnasium area, but the project had been abandoned due to budget constraints. However, some of the work had already been completed, creating the void that would later become the students' prison. The concealed entrance had been installed by a maintenance worker who had since died, taking the secret with him. When the renovation project was cancelled, the space had simply been sealed and forgotten. The tragic irony was that if anyone had remembered the abandoned renovation project, or if proper records had been maintained, the 8 students might have been found within days of their disappearance. Instead, they had died just yards away from the gymnasium where their classmates had danced and celebrated. The forensic investigation provided additional heartbreaking details. Evidence suggested the students had survived for approximately 3 to 4 weeks after the graduation party, much longer than anyone had imagined possible. They had been resourceful, using their formal wear to collect condensation for drinking water and carefully rationing the few snacks they had brought with them. The journals revealed that they had maintained their friendship and dignity even facing certain death. They had continued to support each other, share memories, and express love for their families. Their final entries spoke of acceptance, gratitude for the years they had shared together, and messages for the families they hoped would someday read their words. The discovery transformed how Millfield remembered the 8 missing students. They were no longer mysterious figures who had simply vanished, but real people whose final chapter had been written in their own words. The community finally understood what had happened to their children, even though the knowledge brought both closure and renewed grief. The families chose to have their children buried together in Millfield Cemetery, with a memorial that included excerpts from their final journal entries. The hidden chamber at Jefferson High was permanently sealed, but not before being carefully documented and preserved as evidence of both tragedy and the remarkable courage of 8 young people who had faced the unimaginable with grace. The renovation of Jefferson High continued, but with a new sense of purpose. A memorial garden was created where the hidden chamber had been discovered, with 8 oak trees planted to honor the students who had been found at last. Their graduation photos were moved to a place of honor in the main entrance, where every student would see them and remember. The case became a catalyst for changes in building codes and renovation procedures. Schools across the state were required to conduct thorough surveys of their facilities to ensure no similar hidden spaces existed. Construction projects now required more detailed documentation and oversight to prevent spaces from being forgotten or overlooked. For the families, the discovery brought the closure they had sought for 3 decades, though it came with new pain. They finally knew what had happened to their children, but they also learned how close rescue had been and how their loved ones had suffered. The knowledge was both a blessing and a burden. The community of Millfield slowly began to heal from the trauma that had haunted it for 30 years. The mystery was solved, the questions were answered, and the 8 students could finally rest in peace. Their story became a reminder that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually finds its way to light.